Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you're doing fantastic today. If you don't know me, if you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I am a runner, which is what I'm going to do when I get done here. I'm a mother. I'm a nana. I'm a significant other. I'm a wellness advocate, studying to be a personal trainer. Looking down the barrel of grad school, so many things that I'm so excited about. Good morning, Miss Tabitha. But Wellness Wednesday is something I started because it was on my heart to share with others some of my journey and how I became more well. Good morning, Erica. Fighting with anxiety and depression for most of my adult life. The thing is that we can do better if we share tips, if we share with other people what we have done, because some things work for some people and some things don't work for some people. And there are so many, wellness is such a broad topic. There's so many things that it covers. And last week, what we talked about was bullying. So this is kind of a 3-part series. Last week was about bullying in the workplace or in the professional world. And today we're going to talk about bullying in relationships. And not just romantic ones. There's bullying that goes on in families. There's bullying that goes on in friendships. And unfortunately, romantic relationships, that's most often the case because those are the people closest to us. I had an experience with a friend years ago who was a mother of a child that my daughter was friends with. And we started out with what I thought was a good friendship. But as time went on, I started dating someone. I don't know what the situation really was. He was a little bit younger than me. So there was a lot of comments, especially in group situations, about me dating this younger guy. And these comments turned into jokes, and these jokes turned into ribbing. And this became a continuous cycle of just anytime I was with her, I ended up feeling embarrassed or angry or put down. And at the time, of course, I hadn't yet learned that I was experiencing bullying in the workplace. So as much as I was bullied as a child, I had reactions to this type of behavior that were very similar to that from when I was a child, but I didn't realize, I never equated bullying with adulthood. I just never did. You think it's something that when you're not, if you experience it as a child, you think that it's something that it's something you grow out of. It's something they grow out of. And it does have long-term and long-lasting effects, but it is so much harder for us as adults to wrap our minds around the fact that we might still being bullied. And more often than not, if we've been bullied as children, one of two things happens. We either become the bully later in life because we're still trying to find importance and find a place, or we are as susceptible, if not more susceptible, to bullying as adults. So bullying happens in lots of ways. Verywellfamily.com defines bullying as when people who claim to care about you are controlling and manipulative. This is abusive behavior. And that's really what it boils down to. A lot of times we talk about emotional abuse, we talk about mental abuse, we primarily talk about physical abuse. But that's where bullying, especially at the adult level, falls into, is emotional and mental, well, even at a childhood level, emotional, mental, and sometimes physical abuse. Very Well Family says that abusive behavior is the epitome of bullying. And in family situations, that's also known as relational aggression. And we already know what it's probably the most talked about is relationship bullying. And we won't get into all the terms and personality diagnoses that sometimes come with this. But there are some very basic signs that we can talk about that indicate that you're being, for lack of a better way to put it, bullied in any adult relationship that you have. And remember the stat I talked about last week, which was that there was a study done. It was a Harris poll of about 2,000 people. And out of that 2,000 people, about roughly 31% of them had been bullied as an adult. So let's talk about the signs. And this is This can be specific. Some of these are very similar to the workplace or professional bullying we spoke of last week. However, some of these are also more specific to the relationships that are closest to you, like your significant other, a close family member, a not so close family member that you don't see all the time, and even a close friend or somebody you consider to be a close friend. So what are those 8 signs? I have 8 signs. There's actually a lot more, but these 8 are the ones that I was able to kind of put together that kind of cover all 3 types of relationships, which is familial, friendship, and relationship. So number 1 is that your opinions are always invalidated. I used to have a friend that would play with me what I called the I Can Top It game. And it was very frustrating for me because it didn't matter what I said I had going on or what I said I thought. Good morning, Denise. That individual always had something bigger that was going on, something that was more terrible, more important, always had something to come back with that. And that's why I called it, it's hard to explain, but if you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. It just always seemed like we were playing the I Can Top It game. And a lot of times when you're trying to speak to somebody you consider to be a friend and you're trying to share with them what's going on in your world, especially something that's bothering you, and you're trying to share it with a trusted friend, when you're getting a constant comeback of, well, you wouldn't believe what happened to me, or I can top that, or my day was much worse than yours, that's a constant feeling of invalidation. If you're constantly being told that your opinions are wrong or that you're crazy for thinking that way, those are huge red flags that there's something off in the balance of the relationship. If your life choices are always under judgment, and a lot of times this happens in a familial situation, sometimes in a friendship situation, often in a relationship, but more often in a familial situation where everything you do is being criticized by somebody who's supposed to be close to you or claims they love you. Whatever it is, it's not good enough. You could have something huge happen, like my mentor just became a best-selling author, but maybe the response would be something like, well, why did you choose to do that? Well, how are you a best-selling author and I'm just using this as an example of something that could happen, not something that did happen to her, but this huge accomplishment, and this other individual could be tearing it down. So when your life choices are always under judgment, and the people that you feel closest to you are always criticizing and questioning why you did what you did and why you didn't do it differently or better, or finding something better you should have done instead of what you did, instead of recognizing your accomplishment and your life choices, if you've made a good move, and making you feel good about it, then that's probably not a healthy relationship or a healthy dynamic. Number 3, underestimation of your accomplishments. Oh, well, that's no big deal. That's cool. And we're back to the I Can Top It game. See, a lot of these tie together. If you've had a huge accomplishment and they're acting like it's no big deal and maybe you should have done it sooner or you should have done it better. It's kind of similar to your life choices being under judgment. This is somebody that's not in your corner. And if you have amazing things happen to you and they are not, and they are putting you down and they are minimizing those accomplishments and making you feel like they are not as good as they are, or as good as they feel for you, and making you feel bad about yourself, or maybe not. Like I said, let's take, for example, my mother got her GED I want to say in her 30s. That's a wild guess. She can correct me if I'm wrong, but my mother got her GED in her 30s. Now, other family members could have said, oh, that's great. Well, you should have just done that. You should have just graduated. You should have just done that as soon as you figured out you weren't going to finish high school. All these things, instead of those of us who were in her corner saying, Mom, that's fantastic. I'm so proud of you for doing that. to do what you've done at this stage of the game, as many years as you've been out of high school, is phenomenal. Those are the kinds of things the people around you that are in your corner should be saying in a situation like that. Not, well, it's about time, and you should have done this sooner, and things like that. These are the types of underestimation of accomplishments and judgment of life choices that we're talking about here. Lack of respect, name calling, and condescending speech. This friend of mine that I spoke of, where the relationship just gradually got more antagonistic, where basically she was picking on me all the time for everything I did, that she didn't agree with, or maybe she was jealous that she did not, that she didn't have the type of relationship I was having at the time. Or whatever the situation was there, I don't understand. I never did understand it. And I don't try to understand it now, because I now understand that that was more about her and her insecurities and me just being the target of that than it was about anything that I was or was not doing wrong or right. And that's the big key there. So, but that lack of respect, name calling, condescending speech, if you have someone that claims they love you, but they're always speaking to you in a way that makes you feel stupid, or makes you feel less than, or they're constantly interrupting you. They don't let you finish sentences. Now, come on, this happens when people are excited. If you're having a normal conversation, sometimes you're excited. You've got things you want to tell, especially if it's somebody you haven't talked to in a while. And good friends do have a tendency to interrupt each other sometimes. Partners have a tendency to interrupt each other sometimes. I know sometimes that I interrupt my boyfriend because I'm excited about something, or he's saying something and I have a question and I forget to stop and let him finish. That's just excitement and engagement in the conversation. And I usually do apologize if I've interrupted him. I probably do it more than I care to admit, but it's not in this type of fashion. But a general lack of respect, if you're constantly, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, people who just constantly interrupt you and never let you finish a sentence, and just you can never get it out to the point where you have to be like, okay, can I just get this thought out? And then maybe that would answer your question. When it's to that point, or if they're name calling, if they're, calling you some obscure name that's hurtful, and then, oh, well, I was just joking. I was just joking, right? And again, the condescending speech where they're talking down to you. I was in a relationship where the person was not abusive per se, but there were a lot of times that I felt like that person's child, or somebody that person was coaching instead of their partner. And that's what I mean by condescending speech, where they're constantly talking down to you, making you feel like you don't know enough, or like you're not good enough, or that they're exasperated with explaining to you, or whatever. If you feel more like somebody's child, or student, errant student, or like, that's what I usually call it, is errant child, than you do like their partner or their friend, then that's a red flag, and there's an issue there that needs to be addressed. Public humiliation. We talked about that a little bit with the life choices always under judgment. When the person you are with, whether it's a family member, a friend, or a partner, when the person you are with is frequently doing things that appear to be intentionally to embarrass you in a public situation, to make you, kind of set you up to make you look bad in a public situation, that's a huge flag, y'all. That is a huge flag. If there's a problem with you and your partner, you and your friend, that would cause that kind of situation, if you and that person aren't both willing to deal with that in a private setting, there were times where I got very upset and felt very embarrassed in a public situation, but I would usually pull that individual aside and address it quietly where no one else could hear it. If you've got somebody that's addressing things very publicly where other people are around and making you look bad or feel embarrassed, that's a huge problem, and usually kind of goes hand in hand with gaslighting. Number 7, controlling and demanding behavior or isolation. Now, this happens more frequently in relationships, romantic relationships, However, it can happen in friendships and in familial situations where people are controlling, and they always you're always doing, let me give you an example of a friendship. You're always doing what they want to do. What you want to do is always a second option, or we'll do that later. I want to do this right now. This happens from childhood, all the way up to adulthood. So if you have a relationship with somebody, friendship, family, whatever, and again, this kind of goes back to opinions being invalidated too, where what you want to do, your opportunity to speak, your feelings, all of those things are always pushed out of the way to go do what they want to do or deal with their problem at hand or whatever. That's a demanding, controlling situation. If you're being told that you can't handle certain responsibilities or decisions as an adult, and therefore your partner needs to make them for you. For example, the friend that you're hanging out with is no good for you, is a bad influence. This doesn't just happen this isn't just, we're not just talking parents telling their children, hey, that kid's no good, stay away from him. We're talking about grown adults telling other grown adults, you can't hang out with that person, or isolating you by, again, embarrassing you, maybe in front of family, and then making it look to your family like they are right and you are wrong, and kind of sticking a wedge in your family relationship. Those, again, are red flags. And a lot of times when you hear these things, you hear me saying that this is nothing you don't know or nothing you haven't heard before, but maybe you haven't attributed it to a certain situation until you hear somebody else say it. Or maybe you have a friend that you've been helping through a bullying situation, not realizing that you yourself are experiencing it in another area over here. So that's why I want to give these signs that are kind of typical of all forms of adult bullying, relationships, familial stuff, friendships, because they can happen in all these situations. Emotional blackmail is a big one. Emotional blackmail is a huge one, because that's where that other individual is pushing your buttons and playing on your guilt response. And a lot of times, if we've experienced depression, anxiety, any kind of emotional, mental, or physical abuse as children, we've often been made to feel like things are our fault. So we carry these gigantic guilt suitcases. And these people that are preying on us, they know that, and they take advantage of that. And they say things like, well, if you don't do this, or if you don't do this way, or if you're going to insist on feeling this way, then I'm going to leave, or I'm going to have a conversation with your family member. I actually have someone in my life who's experiencing a blackmail situation now, because their partner, and I have to be careful how I say this because I can't go into too much detail, but because their partner is basically trying to intimidate them and make them feel less than, and is making accusations that are not true or maybe not appropriate, and then because that person isn't strong enough to understand and is basically just operating out of fear and wanting to avoid any kind of drama or issues, they're giving in. So they're doing things and giving things they wouldn't otherwise be doing or giving because of this emotional blackmail that they're experiencing, because of this guilt button, because they're not arming themselves with information like we talked about last week, to make sure that they really do know what kind of repercussions there would be if this person went forward with what they're threatening. So emotional blackmail is a huge thing. It often happens in family and relationship situations. If that's the way you feel, then I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't want to see you anymore. You can't see your grandchildren. Those types of things. Those are abusive and bullying, controlling situations. And then the last one, of course, is physical abuse. This usually follows an isolation technique or tactic. If somebody is controlling you and trying to isolate you from your loved ones and family, they're no good for you. They don't like you. They don't want to be around you anymore type thing. That's an isolation tactic that usually precedes a pretty serious abuse situation. Not always, but usually it precedes a pretty serious emotional or mental or physical abuse situation. And then, of course, there's physical abuse. So how do we handle this? Well, a lot of those things are similar to what we talked about last week in professional and workplace bullying, because a bully is a bully is a bully. Although the truth of the matter is that when it comes down to friendships, relationships, and family, it is a lot harder to put up walls, put up blocks, and walk away. So the first thing to do is make a decision that that behavior is unacceptable, that you are not going to be bullied, that you are not going to be made to feel less than. There's a quote that was used in the Princess Diaries movie, and I can't remember who did it, but it basically was that nobody can make you inferior. Nobody can make you inferior besides yourself, or nobody has the right to make you inferior, make you feel inferior. Something of that nature. I'll find it and I'll put it in the comments. But I'm sure you've heard it or you're familiar with what I'm talking about. So make a decision that it's unacceptable to be treated that way, that it's unacceptable to be spoken down to. And that will allow you to communicate when these things happen. There are situations where things like this happen, and this, especially in a family where this has just become the dynamic of the family, sisters, brothers picking on each other. And that's the way they've always done it. So as you grow and evolve and it becomes more bothersome as an adult, you may be able to communicate that firmly to that family member or the friend and say, listen, this is not okay with me. This is how this makes me feel. And I'm not going to participate in it anymore. If you cannot speak to me like I'm a human, or you cannot speak to me like I'm an adult or with respect, then we're not going to talk. That's not emotional blackmail. This is how I feel. This is hurting me. And when you can speak to me like I'm a human being, or without shouting or being reasonable or whatever, then we can talk. Until then, I can't. It's okay to do that. And it's best in those situations to try to avoid getting emotional, because if this is a true bullying situation where this person is feeling better by putting you down and poking at you and picking on you, then getting emotional feeds that. So if it's best to step away from the situation if you can, if you feel it's something that you can deal with through communication and confronting, not physically, confronting verbally, to say, hey, this is not okay with me. I know that like I said, maybe it's a brother or sister. I know we've always been like this, but this has really started to bother me over time, and I'm not okay with this anymore. But try to do that. Try to step away until you can have that conversation where you can control your emotion a little bit. It's okay to set boundaries and limits. I've talked about this in many forms of Wellness Wednesday, up to and including dealing with family over the holidays. If it is something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that doesn't align with your goals or your growth, it is okay to set a boundary, set a limit, put up your hand and say, no, I can't do this right now. If you are in a situation where you are very emotional and you do not feel like you can speak to that individual without losing it, then it is okay to put up your hands and say, no, I can't do this. It is also okay when it comes to family to say, listen, I'm not going to come around. And again, that smacks a little bit of that emotional blackmail I just talked about, but I can't come today. So I have to be careful. I'm not going to come around if this is how I'm going to be treated. It is okay to set those boundaries and limits. Listen, if this is what's going to happen every time we get together, maybe we should take a break. Maybe I should, not hang out for a while. I know that it can seem like a gray area between what I'm talking about and the emotional blackmail, but there is a difference there. There is a difference between somebody saying to you, well, if you're going to feel that way and if you're going to do this, then I'm not going to be here when you get back. Or, I'm not going to let you see your grandkids anymore, versus, hey, you are making me feel less than. I feel like I'm constantly being dismissed, so I cannot be around this right now. It's not healthy for me. There's a huge difference between those two things. Ignore or block when possible. Again, this is kind of similar to the workplace bullying we talked about. if you can ignore the bully, sometimes just not feeding that person, if it's a family member that's just constantly on your case, if you can ignore them, change the subject, and just not feed that, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's enough to get them back down. They'll go pick on somebody else that's going to feed into that drama and feed into that fire. That's not always possible, especially with family, especially if it's somebody that you live with, or a close friend. So that means that you have to end the relationship. Good morning, Dawn. That means you have to end the relationship. Now, there's a lot of you that might be going, but it's a family member. I can't do that. Well, yes, you can. You can't take away the fact that they are related to you. And yes, we have always been taught to love our family regardless of what they do. But toxic is toxic. That's the bottom line. So if you have a family member who is constantly engaging in these activities and making you feel bad and judging your life choices, and every time you are around them, it is just toxic, and you walk away feeling like you've been scraped off the bottom of the barrel. Good morning, Artur. Then you really need to rethink the time you're spending with that person. It's probably best. There's plenty of family out there, and I love my family. I'm a huge advocate for including your family and accepting your family when you can. But if it is so toxic that they are constantly humiliating you, and you have maybe spoken up to them and said, hey, when you do this, it really bothers me, and it hasn't stopped, or if anything, it's gotten worse, then you need to end that relationship. Same thing with friendship. I ultimately ended my friendship and stopped spending time with that person that was making me feel terrible every time I was with them. I just started making excuses. Unfortunately, our daughter started hanging out with other people, so that made it a little easier over time. But for a while there, it was difficult. Sorry, no, I'm really busy. I can't come do that. Thanks for the invitation, but I already have other plans. Sometimes you have to do that to take that break and get away from that situation. And then usually, if it's as toxic as it sounds, usually as that time goes on, especially if it's a friendship situation, you'll just stop kind of crossing paths, and you'll stop communicating. But sometimes you do have to end the relationship, especially if it's a romantic relationship that this kind of thing is going on. Then you really need to stop and take a good hard look at what's happening and consider whether or not this relationship is healthy for you to continue. And when that time comes, especially if there's any kind of emotional, mental, or physical abuse going on in the romantic relationship, that may be when you do have to seek the help of support groups or even legal help. And I don't want to dive in too much into that, but there are support groups available. If that is a physically abusive situation, there are shelters available. And if that is the situation, then I heavily encourage you to seek out help from support groups, local shelters, trusted family members that haven't been isolated from your circle by that individual. So this is a very, very broad overview of adult bullying in relationships. There's a lot more to it. I have a lot of research that I did, links that I can share. If you're interested in those, you can reach out to me. I'll be happy to send some of those. I'm happy to listen if you have a situation. Yes, I can offer advice, but advice sometimes just isn't as good as just having somebody that you can share that information with. So things to remember before I let you go, because again, when we get on the topic of bullying and abusive relationships and things like that, this can go kind of long. I usually try to keep it under 30 minutes, but so things to remember. If you are dealing with somebody in your life, or you're listening to me and you're like, I was just telling my friend this the other day, but now I realize this is happening to me over here too. Here's the things to remember when you're dealing with any of these kind of situations. Number one, you have a right to be treated with respect. And the only time that I would say you don't have that right is if you are the one who is treating somebody else with disrespect. You kind of give what you get, but if you have a right to be treated with respect, period. Number two, you have a right to set boundaries. We talked about that already. That means drawing lines in the sand and saying, I'm not going over here, and I don't want this to come over here. You have the right to say no. If there's something going on that you're not comfortable with, that you don't want to do, that's making you feel less than, or maybe just putting you in a precarious situation, you absolutely have a right to say no. You have the right to block people on Facebook if things are happening on social media, and you have the right to stop engaging. And that's what I mean by ignoring. Just stop engaging. A lot of times that takes the wind out of a bully's sail if you're just not reacting and you're not responding and you're not engaging. We're talking kind of lower level stuff here. If it hasn't progressed to the point where you're actually being emotionally and mentally, or God forbid, physically abused on a regular basis, then there might be an opportunity here to stop the behavior, especially with a friend or a family member, by just not engaging. When it's a romantic relationship, if it's reached that point, there might be something more serious happening there. You have the right to have different opinions than others. It doesn't mean if you disagree with a family member or friend that you all have to beat it into each other. You have the right to have different opinions than others. They have the right to have a different opinion. And if somebody can't let it go and is insistent on just continuing to come at you until you agree with their opinion, then that's when you probably need to walk away and stop engaging and maybe reevaluate the time or the kind of conversations you're having with that person. Number 6, most importantly, in all of these situations, even though it may not always seem like it, you have a choice. You have a choice to remove yourself from the situation or not participate in the bullying situation or the abusive situation. You have a choice. And again, if it has reached a point where you don't feel like you have that choice or you're in fear, then you need to reach out to a trusted family member, a trusted friend, a local shelter, law enforcement, whatever the case may be. So I can't stress enough that if it reaches the point where there's that kind of abuse going on, you need to get out. And if you're afraid, then you need to get law enforcement, support groups, local shelters, and people of that nature involved. So next week, we're going to talk about childhood bullying, but we're going to talk about approaching it as an adult, how to approach when childhood bullying is happening. That could probably easily be another very long conversation. I will try to keep it to half an hour, but I hope you found this helpful. And if you did find this helpful, please feel free to share it. If you have someone that you know of that may benefit from this, but maybe doesn't want to be publicly tagged in something like this, that's totally okay. You should have the option when you hit the share button to share it with just them through Messenger, and then nobody can see who you're sending it to. So again, if this was helpful to you, let me know. Share it if you think that it will be helpful to somebody else. If you want to know about any of the links I used for the basic information I shared here, send me a message. I love to learn, so if you have another topic that you think would be good to cover under Wellness Wednesday and you just don't know where to start, send me a message. I'll be happy to take a look at it. Just no politics, no negativity, other than the kind of negativity we're trying to approach here in a positive manner. I hope you have a fabulous day. It is time to wrap it up. So happy Wednesday, be well. And again, if this was helpful to you, please share, reach out to me if you want those links. And I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye. Have a fabulous day.